Welcome to NEDEX International. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has announced a new mobilization affecting nearly 150,000 male citizens, as the Russian army faces an average loss of 30,000 soldiers per month. This indicates that Putin has forgotten his war objectives. Public reaction against the war is intensifying, and mobilization decisions are sparking debates. Let's move on to the details. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has almost sworn to completely lose public support. The Russian leader, who reintroduced outdated methods to enable the Russian army, whose average monthly soldier loss reached 30,000, to continue the war, implemented a new mobilization decision that will cover about 150,000 male citizens. The mobilization process, which is stated to continue until the end of December, has already driven the Russian people, whose anger at the government is increasing day by day, crazy with anger. As you may recall, Russian President Vladimir Putin made great promises to his people and army during his statement dated February 24, 2022, when he announced the decision to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukrainian territory under the name of a special military operation. The Russian leader guaranteed that this war would be won with minimal casualties in just a few months, and in the process assured that the impact of the war would not be felt in any way within the borders of Russia and its allies. However, contrary to what was promised, when we look at the war that has been going on for almost 3 years today, it can be easily said that Putin has completely forgotten his promises. As of the second half of 2024, the Russian forces, which began to fail to get the desired result from their offensive attempts, also faced very serious difficulties in ensuring their own border security. The battle, in which the roles completely changed, along with the cross-border offensive launched by the Ukrainian army against Russia's Kursk Oblast on August 6th and still continuing, also clearly showed that the Russian army cannot manage both attack and defense at the same time. The biggest misfortune of the Russian army, whose average monthly manpower loss has exceeded 30,000 in the last 3 months, has been the outdated strategies implemented by Putin, who has not given up his insistence on the continuity of the war in any way in line with his own interests. Monday, September 30th, Vladimir Putin issued a decree ordering 133,000 more young Russian male citizens to be sent to the front. This decision, which has led to the frenzy of parents who are already extremely angry about the mobilization decisions taken during the process, will cover male citizens between the ages of 18 and 30. Tuesday, October 1 will come into force as of the mobilization process, will continue until December 31. In the past mobilization processes, the source of parents' reaction and concerns was the sending of conscripted recruits to the front lines. But now that the Ukrainian army is intensifying offensive attempts and airstrikes against Russia's border regions, such as Kursk, it shows that any place where these novice troops will be deployed will be equally dangerous. The possibility of these new recruits, who currently have no combat and field experience, being sent to areas close to the war zone and unstable border areas has already caused a huge public debate. However, the number of male citizens affected by the mobilization decisions taken during the war is also on a constant increase. While the number of recruits was limited to 130,000 last year, this year it reaches up to 300,000 when the spring draft is taken into account. As you will recall, under the name of the spring draft, 150,000 male citizens were recruited to the army for a mandatory 1-year military service within the scope of the decision put into operation after this year's Russian presidential elections. At this point, even citizens who still had time for compulsory military service were forced to join the army as a result of changes made to official records. Another problem is that while male citizens who will perform compulsory military service should be deployed completely away from the battlefield, as a result of a sudden change in balances, these novice troops found themselves in the areas where the war was most intense. In accordance with the decision of the command center, these novice troops assigned to border regions such as Kursk literally experienced a nightmare as a result of the Ukrainian army's full professional brigades launching an offensive on these border regions. This crisis, which has led to an intense public reaction, has once again shown its impact in the survey results published by independent public opinion organizations. According to the results of a poll published by Chronicles in September, 49% of the Russian people demand the complete withdrawal of the Russian army from Ukrainian territory and the achievement of a peace agreement with Ukraine, even if the war goals have not been achieved. Chronicles officials, who stated that this rate was around 40% before the Kursk operation in Ukraine, stated that as a result of the excessive prolongation of the war and making its impact felt inside Russia, the views of citizens, and especially parents whose family members were conscripted against the war, have completely changed. However, at this point, the fact that Putin and his team do not stop putting forward mobilization decisions and other outdated practices that will allow them to continue the war takes the people-government tension to a completely different level. The families of Russian soldiers who were recruited into the army as a result of mobilization decisions or changes related to compulsory military service and lost their lives during the war did not hesitate to confront Putin at this point and made intensive efforts to stop this irrational course. One of these names, Elena Shumilova, stated directly in her letter to Putin that she no longer respects the head of state. As a soldier's mother, Shumilova, who wants her son to be sent to an active battlefield and to have his death explained to her by the government, said, "You are shouting loudly that soldiers are not fighting, but their mother continues to mourn them. How does this happen?" Elena Shumilova, who stated that none of the promises made to them as parents were fulfilled, reproached these novice soldiers, stating that they were not taught anything except to shoot several times before they were put in danger and sent to the center of the active battlefield. Shumilova noted that Putin and his team could have sent their own family members to the war to continue this war, but instead Kremlin officials took their own family members abroad during the war process. The Kremlin administration, which sees the soldiers it has sent to the front as just numbers, has resorted to repressive and authoritarian arrangements to ensure that the mobilization process ends as they want, despite the intense criticism they have been subjected to. As a result of these regulations, citizens who are obliged to join the army in accordance with the mobilization decision, but who do not apply to the military service branch during this period, will be sentenced to up to 2 years in prison. The Kremlin, which wants to recruit a total of 283,000 citizens to the army within a year, has decided to evaluate prisoners to increase the manpower in the army, not limited to this. Tuesday, September 24th, the deputies of the Russian State Duma signed a new draft law. If this law is approved, the proven guilty defendants will be recruited into the army with a contract they will sign in the courtroom and will allow them to get rid of their criminal records. This method, which was first tried to be implemented by the former leader of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, in the summer of 2022, enabled thousands of prisoners to get out of prison for the first time by taking advantage of 6 months of compulsory military service. However, former prisoners who completed their military service were found to repeat their former crimes as soon as they returned to Russia and at the same time committed much more serious crimes. For this reason, this application, which has caused great concern for the Russian people, can now be formalized by obtaining the approval of the government itself. However, it should not be forgotten at this point that Prigozhin, Wagner's former leader, chose prisoners who were already in prisons. The draft law of the Russian State Duma will allow defendants to get away with their crimes by signing a contract in the courtroom without even being sent to prison. The draft law, which will be added to the legislation by Russian President Vladimir Putin, if approved in the upper house, has caused great concern and reaction among both the army and the popular base. Why the Kremlin is approaching so hastily to solve the manpower crisis can be understood somewhat, considering the data published by the Ukrainian General Staff. Tuesday, October 1st, in a report published in the early hours of the General Staff of Ukraine, the officials of the Ukrainian General Staff stated that the Russian armed forces have lost a total of 6 soldiers since February 24, 2022, when the full-scale invasion attempt ignited the fuse. Monday, September 30th, 1370. Russian soldiers neutralized on Monday. The statements of the Ukrainian authorities, stating that this number also includes, shows that Russia may soon become unable to find troops, even to provide border security, let alone to continue the war. At this point, Putin and his team have to make a difficult decision between implementing mobilization decrees at the cost of completely losing public support, or accepting absolute defeat and accepting a compromise with Ukraine. The Ukrainian army continues to make its mark on the war with unmanned combat aircraft. Ukrainian unmanned combat aircraft, which Russian President Vladimir Putin despises, continue to cause millions of dollars of damage to Russia. The Ukrainian army managed to destroy Russia's anti-aircraft system worth billions of dollars thanks to drone technology, without the need for any military forces. This successful operation, which is the subject of the agenda all over the world, was also shared by international news agencies. Can Ukraine defeat the Russian army using only unmanned combat aircraft technology? The comments of war analysts on this topic surprised everyone. We see that the violence of the war between Russia and Ukraine, which has been going on for 2.5 years, is increasing every day. The Russian army thought that with the weapons and military equipment it had, it would invade Ukrainian territory within a short period of time. The reason why Russian soldiers got caught up in this idea is because of the words that Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russian General Staff Chief Valery Gerasimov have said about their own army inventories. Russian leader Putin had already stated in the first weeks of the war that they would successfully complete these invasions of Ukrainian territory within months. At the same time, Russian General Valery Gerasimov claimed that the whole world will see the impact of important military weapons such as Russia's S-400 air defense systems, long-range Iskander missiles, Sukhoi Su-35 fighter jets, and T-90 tanks in this war. However, if you have noticed, important Russian weapons such as Su-35 and T-90 were not used on Ukrainian territory in the first months of the war. Instead, Russia preferred to use Iranian-made Shahed 136 model unmanned combat aircraft and Soviet-era T-72 battle tanks. But these preferences of Russia have caused the Russian army, which continues to fight on the territory of Ukraine, to gradually begin to lose strength. It was precisely from this point that Russia began to actively use T-90 tanks and Su-35 fighter jets in Ukraine. However, unmanned combat aircraft and drones became the most used weapons in this war again. We have been witnessing the professional use of Ukrainian unmanned combat aircraft and drones on social media platforms since the beginning of the war. Russia used Shahed 136 unmanned combat aircraft it procured from Iran in this war, and still continues to use them. Ukraine, on the other hand, was using Bayraktar TB2 model, unmanned combat aircraft it had procured from Turkey extensively. But later in the war, Ukraine committed a lot of capital to the production of drones, and thanks to these drones, it managed to destroy billions of dollars of Russia's weapons and ammunition. Now the Ukrainian army has destroyed the anti-aircraft system that Russia praises with a drone again. As for the details of the news, in the news made by the Kyiv Independent, the statement made by the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Unit on October 6th was included. In this news shared by the Kyiv Independent, it was stated that the Russian OSA air defense system was destroyed by an FPV, especially an unmanned aerial vehicle. The intelligence agency stated that the value of the drone they had organized the operation was only a few $100s, while the destroyed Russian air defense system was worth $10 million. One of Russia's most famous air defense systems, the 9K-33 OSA, was developed in the Soviet Union in 1960. This air defense system, which is used by many different countries, including Russia and Ukraine, is known as a highly mobile, short-range, and low-altitude surface-to-air missile system. The Ukrainian intelligence unit did not hesitate to publish all the images of this operation that they had organized. In these obtained images, the moments when the Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicle entered the Russian weapons system appear moment by moment. Shortly after, images of the burning equipment appear to have been recorded by drones. The Ukrainian authorities did not share any information about where and when this operation was carried out, which they had organized. However, the Ukrainian General Staff announced that Ukraine had destroyed exactly 970 Russian air defense systems before the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Agency released these video images. So since February 24, 2022, the Ukrainian army has destroyed 970 air defense systems belonging to the Russian armed forces. OSA, which is used quite often by Russia, was one of the most used air defense systems by the Russian army against Ukrainian UAVs. According to the Kyiv Independent, Russia claims that the reason it has started using OSAS frequently is because Ukraine has reduced the use of Bayraktar UAVs. Rather, it is stated that some experts have comments in this way. So what is the role of these unmanned combat aircraft on the territory of Ukraine at the moment? At the moment, the whole world has started to invest in unmanned combat aircraft technology. Over the past 2 decades, we have seen that unmanned combat aircraft have started to be produced very frequently, because these unmanned combat aircraft and drones cost much less than tanks and fighter jets. For this reason, large investments are being made in UAV technology. These drones, on the other hand, have created a new concept of power at the moment. These UAVs, which can be controlled without the need for any driver, accompanied by a pilot from a distance of hundreds of kilometers, have become a very effective weapon. And we realize that this UAV technology has become such a great power during this ongoing war on the territory of Ukraine. When we compare this drone technology used by both Russia and Ukraine, we cannot determine which side has the upper hand. However, some claims have started to emerge that Ukraine can win the war only with these UAVs. Some experts say that Russia constantly makes statements that Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles were shot down, but there is no clear evidence that these drones were shot down. Experts claim that Russian drones did not play a major role in this war, but Ukrainian drones played a major role in turning the course of the war in favor of Ukraine. In particular, it is said that the Bayraktar TB2 unmanned combat aircraft used by Ukraine played a decisive role in hunting down Russian tanks, and the movements of Russian forces were monitored thanks to these drones, thanks to Ukraine's aerial reconnaissance units. As the war between Russia and Ukraine continues, the new commander of the 72nd Brigade of Ukraine has also been announced. Mutual conflicts are continuing intensively in the Vuhledar region, which Russia claimed to have fully occupied recently, but it turns out that this is not actually the case. In the news in the Kyiv Independent, the statement made by the 72nd Mechanized Brigade was included. Colonel Alexander Okremenko was appointed as the new commander of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, replacing Ivan Vinnik. According to the news, Colonel Alexander Okremenko previously headed the 14th Mechanized Brigade and the office of the Odessa region. With the withdrawal of the 72nd Brigade from Vuhledar, one of the important front lines located within the Donetsk borders, Colonel Okremenko was appointed as the new commander. Arseny Prilepko, a spokesman for the 72nd Separate Mechanized Brigade, said in a statement to Hromadske that the brigade had retreated from the town but was forming a new line of defense to continue to repel the Russian army. So who is this new commander of Ukraine? According to a report by the Kyiv Independent, Okremenko has been fighting with Russia since the beginning of the conflict in Donbass in 2014 and has received numerous awards for his services. Okremenko was the commander of the 14th Mechanized Brigade at the beginning of the full-scale occupation, and his unit served in the battles in Kiev, Mykolaiv, Kharkov, and Donbass. In July 2023, Okremenko was informed that after the arrest and detention of Chief Yevhen Borisov in connection with the purchase of a large property in Spain, he was appointed head of the regional registration office in Odessa. We see that the war between Russia and Ukraine, which has been going on for 2.5 years, is now continuing on the territory of both Russia and Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin did not anticipate that this war on Ukrainian territory would spill over into Russia's borders so quickly. Vladimir Putin thought that the weapons and military equipment available in the Russian army inventory, especially the number of Russian soldiers, would be enough to win this war on Ukrainian territory. However, the fact that the United States and Western countries provided military support to Ukraine was one of the most important factors that made the war turn in favor of Ukraine. Thanks to the weapons and equipment sent to Ukraine, the Ukrainian army inventory has become much stronger. Although the Ukrainian army does not organize its operations within the borders of Russia with these weapons, it still managed to take control of many residential areas in the Kursk region of Russia with its own means, achieving significant successes on Russian territory. The Ukrainian army continues to carry out successful operations within the Russian borders. The use of long-range missiles supported by the United States was not allowed inside Russia. However, the process shows that Ukraine is not slowing down its progress by its own means. As a result of the excellent research of the Ukrainian intelligence branches, all targets inside Russia are determined in a short time. Then the operations button is pressed. The first objectives of the Ukrainian army within the Russian borders were to neutralize the shipment lines. 3 bridges in the Kursk region were destroyed, dealing a major blow to the Russian shipping line. The defense of the Russian border regions was left to Russian recruits. This is one of Putin's big mistakes. Ukrainian intelligence determines the locations of the headquarters in the Kursk region and deep in Russia, respectively. Since the Ukrainian army conducted a border operation with Russia, many important cities, including Moscow, have been constantly controlled by Ukrainian unmanned combat aircraft and drones. Putin thought that he would invade Ukraine in a 2 to 3 month period, but today he has become unable to protect his own borders. After the Ukrainian army blew up the headquarters in the Kursk region, it targeted the warehouse of military equipment in the Toropets region, located on the banks of the Toropa River. The Ukrainian military uses its own production unmanned aerial vehicles intensively on Russian territory. In addition, bomb-shaped drones are also frequently used to destroy these military equipment warehouses. The Ukrainian army targeted military equipment depots in the Tver and Toropets regions and managed to detonate them with operations they organized in the morning. The Russian missiles' ammunition tanks in the warehouses started to burn after the big explosions. Russia constantly suffers millions of losses. It is starting to become clear that Putin has no place left to step. It is the opinion of war analysts that Putin is dragging Russia into an irreversible catastrophe, and his power is in great danger. Russia is starting to withdraw from many regions in Ukraine. The fact that there is a huge shortage of manpower makes it impossible for them to conduct defense inside Russia as well. Putin, who launched the war of occupation of Ukraine in February 2022, had assured his people that they would not be harmed. However, with the fact that the war lasted much longer than expected and the war changed direction on Russian territory, the Russian people are experiencing the most difficult period in history. The Russian economy is taking big blows every day. The recent attacks of the Ukrainian army have also caused millions in losses. How much longer will Putin be able to continue the war with domestic and foreign borrowing? How much longer will the people hold out? Russia is experiencing the largest migration in its history. Russians who cannot emigrate are citizens who are experiencing financial difficulties. They also had to endure great hardships for the country. The Russian people consider Putin to be the only culprit of this war and its bad results. For this reason, the number of opponents of Putin is increasing day by day. The number of opponents of Putin is increasing, as well as their strength. When we look at history, dictatorial leaders who implemented a one-man regime were ousted from power by their people and army. Among the important views is that this will be the end of Putin. The Ukrainian army is seeking support from the United States for permission to use long-range weapons on Russian territory. However, Putin constantly renews the threat of nuclear weapons if US-made weapons are used on Russian territory. For this reason, there is no permission to use weapons to prevent a global catastrophe. Despite this, the Ukrainian army maintains its superiority on Russian territory by its own means. Putin, who launched the Ukrainian-Russian war with great self-confidence, began to constantly humiliate the world. This situation has completely upset Putin's balance. The fact that he does not know how to find a way out is one of the most important comments of war commentators. The Ukrainian people have a lot of confidence in their leaders and the army. The United States and Western countries are not only providing ammunition and weapons assistance, they also provide educational support to Ukrainian soldiers with specialized military training. Thus, Ukraine has a more solid army strength. Ukraine continues its firm stance against Russia with low-cost unmanned aerial vehicles produced by Western countries with their own support. Will their support status be compromised with the approach of the US election? The question is among the most important agenda items. Although the right-wing parties in the United States have a negative view of the aid provided, Western countries have guaranteed that their support will last until the end of the war. Russia is very worn out in this war. Economically, the trade embargoes of the United States and Western countries and the increasing endless war needs are upsetting the Russian economy. The withdrawal of foreign investors from the country is pulling Russia towards the bottom. Will Putin be able to get out of this economic crisis? Russia was allied with Wagner mercenaries and Chechen soldiers at the beginning of the war. As it is known, with the turn of the war in favor of Ukraine, mercenaries whose maintenance was not covered had withdrawn from Ukraine. Then 2 or 3 weeks later, the president of the Wagner company was killed in a plane crash. The bad course for Putin had started with the withdrawal of mercenaries. With Ukraine moving from a defensive position to an offensive position, everything was starting to get complicated for Russia. Although it has created new solutions to the military power shortage experienced by Putin, sending soldiers to the fronts with short training and being assigned to border defense has made Russia an easy target. Ukraine has managed to turn this situation in its favor in the best possible way. Thanks to the confident work of Ukrainian intelligence, it is able to conduct fast and reliable operations in Russia. The Ukrainian army organizes its strategies in such a way that it completely eliminates Russian soldiers. The best indicator of this is the blowing up of ammunition depots. While Ukraine is proceeding in accordance with the rules of war, Putin continues to commit war crimes in Ukraine. Putin, who is seen as a war criminal in the eyes of the world, does not accept that he is guilty. Putin's circle has narrowed. All the world's media are waiting with curiosity to see what kind of path he will follow. The Russian people may suffer a major blow if the war does not end in the coming time. The Russian army is in a rotten state at a time when orders and powers are in complete disarray. The Russian people really want the war to end, and they have begun to raise their voices even more for this.